So last year I talked about the need for us to establish a new supply chain for the digital news economy because the existing one is unevolved. I don't want to use the term broken because I'm actually optimistic. I want to use the term unevolved because I think it can evolve, and it is evolving in the right direction. But in order to fix this digital economy, in order to establish a supply chain where production and distribution and monetization are all working in collaborative ways, got into the theme. We need to be working more closely together with the platforms that now currently own the distribution of news and information. It used to be the publishers, but it's no longer the case. Now it's the platforms. And so we've effectively seen in the last 10 years the de-verticalization of the news industry, which had been verticalized for generations. And now we're suffering from this de-verticalization, and we're realizing that we need to establish modes of collaboration across the supply chain that now includes new members. Those members being Google and Facebook and Apple and the dominant digital platforms. The problem, though, with establishing this meaningful collaboration is that there is an asymmetry in the engagement. And what I mean by that is there's 3 or 4, really honestly probably 2 or 3 digital platforms that matter. There are thousands and thousands of publishers, there are millions of content creators. And so there's this asymmetry in the engagement between the production of content and the distribution and monetization. So how could we address this asymmetry? And so last year I was at The Guardian, and I was VP of Partnerships at The Guardian for about 6 or 7 months. And really the focus of my effort while I was there was to create a coalition of European publishers led by The Guardian to engage with Google on a variety of fundamental platform initiatives. It's amazing to see Nick here and see all the things that Google's doing, and that has more to do with production of content. I was more interested in how are we going to fix the way content is monetized and fix the way audiences are engaged at a more fundamental level so that we can have a digital supply chain that allows for not just 1 or 2 or 3 news media companies to grow, but for thousands and thousands to employ hundreds of thousands of journalists so that we as a society don't lose the capacity to hold power accountable by virtue of effectively defunding that operation within our society. So how do we fix the economy to effect a change across the entire industry? How do we establish a symmetrical engagement with those 1 or 2 platforms so that we can have a meaningful conversation about the change that has to happen? And this was a really important topic to me because when I was at Google, I spent a lot of time looking at the economics of the industry and looking at how ad technology was evolving and looking at how media models were evolving and realizing that we really needed some fundamentally different things. But I didn't have the ability to actually get Google to do anything. And so I was a strategy guy, and so if you're not a product or an engineer, you really don't build anything at Google. And so I thought, well, that sucks. I kind of want to build stuff. And so, how can I? So then I talked to Andrew Miller, who was the CEO of Guardian Media Group. He said, well, why don't you come over to our side of the table? I'm like, whoa, no way, work for a publisher? That's like worst case scenario. I mean, that is like a hard business. I'd rather stay here at Google where the food is awesome. Maybe I don't get to actually build anything, but the food is really, really good. And it's literally 2 miles from my house. It took less time to ride my bike to the office than it did to drive. But at the end of the day, I thought we really need to have some way of engaging with the industry. The problem that I always had, one of the problems that I always had when I was at Google was that the publishers would come to Google and they would always ask for the wrong things. So I had this grocery list of things that I wish the publishers would ask for, but they just didn't know to ask for those things. And it's not like any of us were telling them. And so long story short, I ended up switching over to The Guardian. I thought, well, let's put together a coalition of news organizations to engage with Google. Google has some issues that they're trying to iron out in the EU. Perhaps we could be helpful in that area. And in return, Google would engage with us on a variety of strategic initiatives. So Andrew thought that was brilliant, and so I moved over to The Guardian. I stayed in Palo Alto. I just spent a week, a month in London, at least, for all of 2015. We pulled together a coalition that we then started calling the Digital News Initiative, which the founder group of publishers included Les Echos in France, La Stampa in Italy, FAZ and Die Zeit in Germany, El País in Spain, and NRC in the Netherlands, and the FT, along with The Guardian in London. And we met every month for most of 2015 with the either the CEOs or the SVPs of digital or strategy or whatever they may be called at different news organizations, to iron out kind of a list of things that we could ask Google for. In return, we may try and influence the circumstances that Google is suffering from with regards to regulatory oversight in EU. And so we came up with this list of stuff. One of the things that we came up with had to do with a problem that I felt we were never going to solve in the context of distribution unless we had a new technology. And the problem that I felt like we had as a technology industry is that when a publisher publishes content to their website, they're publishing it in a way that is awesome, but it requires that you get everybody out on the web to come to your website. That's cumbersome, expensive, complicated, and it's not designed in a way that actually maps to the inherent architecture and beauty of the web, which is a distributed network. But what we didn't have at the time was a technology that would allow for a publisher to create a piece of content, publish it to the web, and wherever that article or that piece of content went, it carried the business rules of the content with it. So it wasn't just the title and the text and the images, but it would be pinging my ad server, it would be sending me audience data, it would be upholding my user authentication requirements for the sake of my paywall models if I'm the FT or whatever. And it would be carrying all those business rules and logic with this atomic unit of content, which is the article, wherever it went. It's not necessarily on my website anymore. It could be on 1 million websites. And if I had something like that, then as a publisher, I would have the possibility of actually managing a scalable business in a digital environment that desperately wants to be distributed. And so we started talking to Google about that, and at the time, the naming of these things was kind of evolving very, very rapidly, and so I had a lot of conversations with Richard Gingras about this stuff. We were calling it portable content units. That seemed to make sense. Then Google said, yeah, let's do that. I'm like, no way! Okay, I've only been asking for like 3 years. But very excited. So Google's going to do this. Amit, who is the guy in charge of all search at Google, was very excited. He went and got Dave Besbris, who's the VP of engineering, to look after this project, comprehensively. Dave Besbris thought, well, why don't we talk about latency while we're at it? And to be honest with you, I had not actually spent any time other than just in concept thinking about how slow page load time kills audience opportunity. I mean, everybody knew that in the abstract, but that hadn't been something that I had really, really dug into. But it was something that was really frustrating for Bez, and so he really, really wanted to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Let's create a technology that carries the business rules with the content wherever it may go, and at the same time, let's do it in a new programming language that allows for us to load pages infinitely faster, increasing the audience opportunity across a mobile web. And I'm like, bonus, 2 birds with 1 stone. So then so they changed the name to Accelerated Mobile Pages, which I thought was better than portable content units for some reason. But yeah, so now that's been launched. There's a variety of other initiatives that I think are hopefully as fundamental in terms of providing a foundation for the economics of the industry. We needed to fix how content was distributed, and I feel with AMP we're doing that. Just in terms of like the timeline of things, we had been having this conversation for a few months with Google when rumors started to really escalate around this idea that Facebook was going to have this thing called instant articles. And so then I was talking to the guys at Facebook at F8 last year. I'm like, that's a great idea. The only problem is that it's only within the walled garden of Facebook. So it's such a great idea that I was terrified of its absolute success. Because if Facebook Instant Articles is absolutely successful, And to Facebook's credit, the publisher gets 100% of what you sell and serve into that specification. But if it's abundantly successful, then the world's most important information required for the maintenance of democracy will only be engaged with within the walls of Facebook. And that seems horrifying to me. So AMP, on the other hand, is a very, very similar specification, except for the entire open web, which then actually provided the publishers with a little bit more sway when engaging with Facebook and trying to figure out how to collaboratively work towards a more evolved instant articles. And so on the one hand, we had an opportunity to benefit Google in the European market through the influence of the news organizations in Europe. And in return for that benefit, we asked Google to build some things, one of which was AMP, and there's some other things that will be announced in the next year or two. And then AMP is now providing the publishers also some opportunity to have a little bit more sway in our engagement with Facebook. And so to me, it's been collaboration at an industry scale, where how do we address the asymmetry to allow for a more meaningful conversation between a ton of publishers and a few platforms, so that we can have a conversation that allows us to help the platforms understand what would be actually also in their interests, as well as the publishers, so that we could be actually growing this economy together. Not every negotiation is a matter of party and counterparty. Sometimes the parties are actually aligned. I know that's not a very Trumpish thing to say. I mean, I think he digs the party-counterparty dynamic in all cases. But I think in this case, it was really, how are we aligned? And I felt like the publishers were fundamentally aligned with the interests that Google had in a beautiful and open and robust web. And so aligning all those interests allowed for a collaboration at an industry scale that has proven very fruitful. There's always a lot of work at maintaining that, which is cumbersome, but the results are pretty dramatic. So my hope for AMP is that we'll have checked the box in terms of resetting the potential for the distribution component of the supply chain to actually provide a meaningful, scalable opportunity for producers of original quality journalism. And then I'm also working with Google and the D&I on a whole host of monetization initiatives. Because now if we have an opportunity to actually grow a scaling audience in a distributed network, we still actually have to improve the monetization rate and make the CPM go up. So we're working on a whole bunch of things on that front as well. And then I thought, I'm so happy that Google launched AMP. So awesome for all those publishers that have the product and eng people to actually take advantage of this in the short term. And that's like 20 companies. And so what about the torso and tail? And I thought, somebody ought to start a company that just automatically converts HTML into AMP HTML without the publisher having to do anything. And so that's where Relay Media came into focus, was basically an off-platform platform where for all those publishers or for all those content creators that just want to create content and don't want to necessarily figure out all of the other aspects to digital content distribution and technologies, that they can just use this platform to make sure that their content is available as an AMP file, also as an instant articles file, without having to do anything. And so that's Relay Media. But maybe I'll leave the last few minutes for questions.
I think that would be great, and if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. So I'm going to ask some dumb questions to see if I can do some translation from my own little, very small brain. You're talking about one-to-few publishing, and you're talking about customization of content delivery that's delivered out of an API that basically takes pieces and parts and dynamically delivers. Is that?
Oh, you mean Relay?
I'm just talking about your supposition of being able to deliver this sort of dynamically evolving content.
Well, I mean, the way AMP works is you have an AMP file that's actually linked to the canonical URL, and so everything still works the way it's supposed to. One of the things that I think was a real amazing sign of progress in terms of the relationship between Google and publishers was that the publishers from the very, very, very beginning were asking for AMP to be launched when the specification supported ad tags, analytics, and user authentication for paywall support. And it was uncharacteristic of Google to wait until all those things were necessarily supported in a new technology before launching it. But to their credit, and it was an amazingly awesome experience to see Google engineers and engineers from a few of the publishers that are involved in the D&I actually collaborating on a new specification for the entire industry, all out in the open in GitHub, so anybody could actually participate in the conversation. And so it was really a matter of making sure that this new open standard for broad content distribution carried those business rules. I wanted wherever my article went, I wanted it to ping my ad server, and I wanted my ad server to be in control of the monetization. Wherever my article went, I wanted it to send me some audience data so that I could actually start to improve my ability to understand who is my audience and where are they and what do they like, so that I can then use that to improve my monetization. Wherever they are, I wanted to uphold, if I'm a paywall publisher, I want that article to actually understand what are my user, my user requirements in terms of the paywall model. And so to Google's extraordinary credit, it was amazing to see this all playing itself out, because there were a lot of things that Google hadn't ever behaved that way, at least when I was there, that it completely shifted. And I think here the thing is, so I'm talking about collaboration like at an industry scale, but it actually is worth noting that the individual personalities matter. And I think, in this context, much like diplomacy, who you're sitting across from the table with is actually extremely important. I really think that if I had had this conversation, because the whole D&I thing started out as a conversation with Andrew Miller, the CEO, Tony Danker, the Chief Strategy Officer, and myself meeting with Omid Kodastani, who was the Chief Business Officer at the time at Google, in a conference room in London. And if it had been someone other than Omid, I don't think this ever would have happened. Because that guy is just fundamentally cool. And he was fundamentally committed to win-win scenarios. And he was also much more inclined to finding alignment than engaging in counterparty negotiations. I think his predecessor was much more inclined to a traditional counterparty negotiation style. And so fortunately, we got to have that conversation with Omid, which was really, really important. Some of the things that we're doing with YouTube now, I think, can only be done because Susan's now there in charge. And if it wasn't for her being in charge, there's no way we'd be doing the things we're talking about doing with YouTube in the European market. So I think individual personalities matter, even in the context of what may seem like geopolitical diplomacy. So,
other questions? Do you think yet that content creators, particularly news organizations, are focused enough in this way, in this very sort of granular way, on the cookie crumb trail that leads to monetization and bringing it all back home? And if not, what do they need to do?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that is going to be a massive shift in terms of thinking will be realizing that and I think more people are realizing this more and more. Your website matters a little bit less. Your app may matter a little bit less. Because the scaling opportunity is to take advantage of the distributed network. Now, there may be an opportunity to take advantage of that distributed network, engage with an audience in a distributed manner, figuring out how to get those people out in the wild on third-party platforms, can be encouraged to come to your platform on your website or your app, can be encouraged to convert into paying subscribers or buying stuff like event tickets and things like that. And so we are actually thinking about what are some ways for us as an industry to establish a much more fundamental method for managing a customer acquisition funnel that starts with out in the wild audience engagement, to on-platform engagement, to actually consumer conversion. Like how do we build stuff that will allow us to actually track that across platforms, across environments? And so there's a lot of conversations on that front as well. But I think that it's going to be a shift in thinking. For a long, long time, the emphasis has been my website, and the emphasis has been my homepage. I think people started to realize, because of search engine optimization, that actually most of your audience was coming in through the side doors. So that was like 5 years ago, when everyone seemed to really kind of recognize that. Doesn't necessarily de-emphasize the kind of the emotional role that the homepage plays, because it kind of has this heritage link to the masthead, which is a major thing. It's a major concept. But I think that as we move more into figuring out how to actually build a business in a distributed network, I think that we'll have to rethink some of the things that might have been the most holy things in a previous economy.
So you keep talking about the same thing year to year.
I know,
but it
yeah.
keeps moving. It keeps moving, so
We're
that's
making
good.
progress, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I mean, I think that it's easy to always talk about this stuff. It's hard to actually do stuff, and I think, you know, if I was just talking and not doing, I wouldn't be here. I'd rather just be anonymous somewhere.
Right.
You know?
Well, we're really glad you're here. Dave Gehring from
Thanks.
Relay Media.